Elderly man mocked by car dealership. The next day, he's their boss. If you're loving these stories, make sure to hit that subscribe button and stick around for more. On a cold afternoon, an elderly man named Walter Briggs stepped into a flashy car dealership, his weathered coat and scuffed shoes starkly out of place against the gleaming luxury cars. Walter wasn't there to make a scene. He was simply looking for a reliable vehicle to replace his old sedan, a car that had faithfully served him for nearly a decade. But from the moment he walked in, Walter could feel the stares. The salespeople, dressed in sharp suits and shiny shoes, didn't even bother to hide their disdain. Instead of offering help, they whispered among themselves, their glances dripping with judgment. As Walter wandered the showroom, admiring a sleek black SUV that had caught his eye, not a single salesperson approached him. Instead, they focused on younger, wealthier-looking customers who walked in with designer handbags and polished watches. One salesman, Trevor Calais, a man with slicked-back hair and a smirk that practically screamed arrogance, briefly glanced at Walter, but quickly shifted his attention to a couple in tailored suits. Walter stood patiently by the SUV for nearly 20 minutes, running his hand over its smooth exterior, imagining himself driving it. When no one came to assist him, Walter finally walked up to the main desk where three salesmen were laughing and scrolling on their phones. "Excuse me," he said politely, his voice steady but calm. "I'm interested in one of your vehicles. Could someone help me?" Trevor didn't even look up from his phone. "We're kind of busy right now," he replied dismissively. "Maybe come back later?" Walter's heart sank. He nodded politely and turned to leave, but not before hearing Trevor mutter to his colleagues, "What a waste of time, just another window shopper." The faint chuckle that followed stung more than Walter let show. As he walked back to his car, Walter's mind was racing. He wasn't just her that was furious. Little did Trevor or anyone else know, Walter Briggs wasn't just another old man in a worn-out coat. He was a highly successful businessman who had built a fortune from decades of hard work and smart investments. By the time Walter drove away in his trusted old car, a plan had already begun to form. He wasn't going to let this humiliation slide, and by the next day, that dealership would never be the same. As Walter Briggs drove away from the dealership, he couldn't shake the humiliation he'd felt. He'd spent his life building a legacy, decades of hard work, wise investments, and quiet generosity. Walter had always believed in valuing people for their character, not their appearance. But at that dealership, none of that mattered. The whispers, the laughter, the way Trevor and his colleagues dismissed him without even bothering to hear him out, it was a bitter reminder of how quickly people judged others based on nothing but a coat and a pair of shoes. But Walter wasn't the type to wallow in anger. Instead, as the cold wind blew against his car's windows, a small, determined smile spread across his face. "If they want to judge me by my appearance, fine. Let's see how they handle what's coming next." That evening, in the quiet comfort of his modest home, Walter began to make phone calls. The first was to an old friend who happened to be a prominent banker. The second was to a business associate who specialized in dealership acquisitions. By the time Walter hung up the phone, a plan had taken shape that would not only teach those salesmen a lesson, but completely transform the dealership itself. Walter spent hours drafting emails, reviewing documents, and orchestrating a move so bold it would leave everyone speechless. While the staff at the dealership likely spent the night laughing about the old window shopper, Walter was setting in motion a plan that would flip their world upside down. By morning, everything was in place. Walter hadn't just decided to teach the dealership a lesson, he'd decided to buy the entire operation outright. And he wasn't doing it for revenge. No, Walter had something much bigger in mind. The next morning, the dealership was bustling with its usual energy salesmen in sharp suits laughing by the coffee machine, customers browsing the showroom, and Trevor Cole already bragging about his latest sale. None of them noticed Walter Briggs walk in. He looked the same as he had the day before, same worn coat, same scuffed shoes, same quiet demeanor. But this time, He wasn't there to buy a car. Walter moved with calm confidence, his eyes scanning the room until they landed on Trevor, who was leaning against a desk, scrolling through his phone. Trevor barely glanced at him before muttering to a colleague, "Great, the old guy's back. Guess he didn't take the hint yesterday." Walter ignored the comment. He wasn't here for petty words. He walked straight to the dealership's general manager, a man named Bradley Kent, who immediately plastered on a fake smile. "Good morning, sir," Bradley said, his tone overly polite but lacking sincerity. "How can I help you today?" Walter reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a crisp set of documents, neatly folded. Without saying a word, he handed them to Bradley. The manager frowned, unfolding the papers, his eyes skimming the text. As he read, his expression shifted from confusion to disbelief, and finally, to panic. This can't be right," Bradley stammered, his voice trembling. "It's correct," Walter replied calmly. "As of this morning, I own this dealership." The room fell silent. One by one, the salespeople noticed the exchange, their curiosity quickly turning to shock as whispers spread like wildfire. Trevor's smug grin faded into a look of pure dread as he realized something big was happening and that Walter wasn't who they thought he was. Walter turned to address the stunned crowd. His voice was calm, but it carried a quiet authority that demanded attention. "Yesterday, I came here as a customer," he began. "I was ignored, dismissed, and judged based on how I looked. That was a mistake. Today, I'm not a customer. Today, I'm your boss." The weight of his words hit like a thunderclap. Bradley stuttered, You can't be serious." "Oh, I'm very serious," Walter replied, with a small, confident smile. As the realization sank in, the staff could do nothing but wait, nervously shifting in their spots. Walter hadn't just bought the dealership, he'd taken control of their fates. The tension in the dealership was thick enough to cut with a knife. Walter Briggs stood calmly at the center of the room, surrounded by the very people who had ignored and mocked him just 24 hours earlier. The general manager, Bradley Kent, still clutched the ownership papers in trembling hands, his face pale. "What's going on?" one of the salesmen whispered to another, their voices laced with unease. Walter cleared his throat, drawing everyone's attention. "Yesterday, I came here looking for a car," he began, his voice steady but firm. "Instead, I was treated as if I didn't matter, judged by my appearance, dismissed without a second thought. But that ends today." He turned his sharp gaze to Bradley. "This dealership has fostered a toxic culture, one that thrives on arrogance and disrespect. That's not how I do business, and that starts with leadership. Bradley, you're fired." The silence was deafening. Bradley's jaw dropped, his voice sputtering. "Fired? You can't be serious." "Oh, I'm dead serious," Walter interrupted, his tone unwavering. "Your leadership has failed, and it's time for a change." Before Bradley could say another word, Walter shifted his attention to the rest of the room. His eyes landed on Trevor Cole, the slick-haired salesman who had dismissed him so casually the day before. Trevor froze like a deer in headlights. "Trevor Cole," Walter said, his voice cold but calm. "You showed me exactly the kind of attitude that has no place here. Pack your things." Trevor's mouth opened, but no words came out. He knew there was no point in arguing. With his head down, he shuffled toward the back office to gather his belongings. Walter wasn't done. He looked around the room, his gaze piercing. "I remember every face and every whisper from yesterday," he said. "If you sneered at me, dismissed me, or judged me without reason, consider this your last warning. Change your behavior, or you'll join them." The remaining staff exchanged nervous glances, their confidence shattered. Walter's authority wasn't loud or Brigitte was quiet, calculated, and impossible to ignore. But Walter wasn't there for revenge. He wasn't interested in firing people just to prove a point. He had a vision, a dealership built on respect, humility, and kindness. and he was just getting started. As the dealership staff stood frozen in shock, Walter Briggs's sharp gaze softened ever so slightly. He wasn't here to destroy, it wasn't about revenge. He was here to rebuild, and for that, he needed to reward the few who had done right. "Not everyone here failed the test yesterday," Walter announced, his voice calm but carrying an edge. "Some of you showed decency, even when it wasn't expected." The room shifted uncomfortably as the employees exchanged uncertain glances. Then Walter's eyes landed on a young woman standing quietly at the edge of the group. "Laura Daniels," he said. Laura's head shot up, her face pale. "Yes, sir," she stammered, unsure what was coming next. "Yesterday, when I was treated like I didn't belong here, you were one of the few people who showed me a shred of kindness," Walter continued. "You greeted me, smiled, and treated me like I mattered even though no one asked you to. That's the kind of leadership this place needs." Laura blinked, clearly caught off guard. "Leadership?" she echoed, her voice shaky. "I've only been here a few months. I'm not." Walter raised a hand, cutting her off gently but firmly. "I'm not interested in seniority," he said. "I'm interested in character. Starting today, you're the new floor manager." The room erupted in murmurs of disbelief. Laura looked stunned. "Me? But I—" "You earned it," Walter said, his tone softening for the first time. "You don't need to prove anything else. Just keep doing what you're already doing, treating people with respect. Congratulations." For a moment, Laura stood frozen, then nodded, her eyes wide with gratitude. "Thank you, Mr. Briggs," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Walter smiled warmly, before turning back to the rest of the staff, his expression hardening once again. "Take note of this," he said. "Kindness and respect will be rewarded here. If you can't live up to that standard, you're in the wrong place." The remaining employees, visibly shaken, stood straighter, realizing this wasn't just a new boss, this was an entirely new era for the dealership. Walter Briggs wasn't just making an example of the staff who had dismissed him, he was laying the foundation for something bigger. After calling out and firing several employees, he addressed the remaining staff, his voice steady and full of purpose. "This dealership will no longer operate the way it has," Walter began, pacing slowly across the showroom floor. "From today forward, respect and humility will be at the core of everything we do. If you can't embrace that, you won't last here." The message was clear. Walter wasn't interested in running a business built on arrogance and indifference. He wanted to create something entirely new, a place where every customer, no matter how they looked, felt valued the moment they walked through the doors. By the end of the day, nearly half the staff had been dismissed. Walter didn't fire them out of spite, was about removing the toxicity that had been poisoning the dealership for years. But this wasn't just about cutting ties, it was about rebuilding. Walter immediately began the process of hiring new employees, prioritizing individuals who understood the importance of respect and genuine customer service. He wasn't looking for flashy sales techniques or polished resumes. He wanted people with the right mindset and values. Word spread quickly. Employees called friends and family, sharing the shocking news of the dealership's dramatic shift in ownership. Customers, too, started to hear whispers of the changes happening inside. "You'll never believe what's happening at that place," one regular customer told a friend. "The new owner fired almost everyone and is turning the whole operation around. It's like a completely different business." Walter didn't just want to fix what was broken, he wanted to set a new standard. And as the dealership began to transform, it became clear to everyone involved. Walter Briggs wasn't an ordinary boss. He was a man with a vision, and he wasn't stopping until it became a reality. The transformation of the dealership wasn't just about new rules or a change in ownership, it was about creating a culture where respect wasn't optional. Walter Briggs stood at the center of the showroom, surrounded by the remaining staff, all visibly shaken by the events of the day. But amidst the tension, there was something new in the air: hope. Walter turned to Laura Daniels, now the newly appointed floor manager. She still looked stunned by her promotion. her hands clasped nervously in front of her. "Laura," Walter said, his voice steady but kind, "this is your chance to set the tone for everyone here. I trust you to lead with the same kindness and fairness you showed me yesterday." Laura nodded, her voice soft but filled with determination. "I won't let you down, Mr. Briggs," Walter smiled. "I know you won't." The remaining staff exchanged wary glances, unsure of what the future held. Walter's leadership was unlike anything they'd experienced before. He didn't yell or make threats, but his calm authority was impossible to ignore. "Let me be clear," Walter said, addressing the group. "This isn't just about selling cars, it's about treating every person who walks through those doors with dignity. Whether they're wearing a three-piece suit or an old coat like mine, they deserve your full respect." The staff listened intently, some nodding in agreement, others still processing the shock of the day's events. Walter wasn't here to scare them, he was here to inspire them. And it worked. Over the following weeks, under Laura's leadership and Walter's guidance, the dealership began to change. The arrogance and indifference that had once defined the place were replaced by warmth and professionalism. Customers noticed the difference immediately. "It's like a completely new place," one man told his wife after buying a car. "They actually treat you like a person now." For Laura, the journey was just beginning. She worked tirelessly to earn the trust of her team and prove that Walter's faith in her wasn't misplaced. And every time Walter stopped by the dealership, he saw the progress she was making. Walter didn't linger to bask in his success, she didn't need the spotlight. His satisfaction came from watching the people around him thrive. The dealership was no longer a place of judgment and arrogance. It was becoming a beacon of what respect and humility could achieve. Weeks had passed, but the ripple effect of Walter Briggs's dramatic takeover was still being felt not just within the dealership but across the entire community. What had once been a place filled with arrogance and dismissal was now unrecognizable. Customers who had been turned away by rude staff were returning, and new faces came in, curious to see the dealership with the old man's magic touch. Walter, as always, stayed out of the limelight. He didn't need applause or recognition. He strolled through the showroom one afternoon, watching as employees greeted customers warmly, their smiles genuine, their attitudes transformed. Laura Daniels, now thriving as floor manager, approached him nervously but with a spark of pride. "Mr. Briggs," she said softly, "I just wanted to thank you for giving me this chance, for believing in me. None of this would have been possible without you." Walter smiled, his weathered face lighting up with kindness. "You earned this, Laura. All I did was notice." Laura hesitated, then asked, "But why did you do it? Why not just walk away after what they put you through?" Walter's expression grew thoughtful as he glanced around the bustling showroom. "Because it's not about me," he said simply. "It's about the people who come through those doors. It's about showing them that respect matters. If I can remind just one person of that, it's worth it." The dealership flourished under Walter's vision. Sales soared, but more importantly, its reputation became something to admire. Customers raved about the welcoming atmosphere, how every employee treated them like family, whether they were buying a luxury SUV or a second-hand sedan. One morning, Walter walked through the doors as he often did, but this time, something caught his eye. Near the front desk was a small plaque that Laura had put up without telling him. It read, "In honor of Walter Briggs, who reminded us that respect and kindness are the most valuable things we can give." Walter stood there for a moment, his hand brushing the edge of the plaque. He smiled to himself, then turned and walked toward the door, his quiet legacy firmly in place. As he left the showroom one last time, the sun casting long shadows across the parking lot, Walter felt a deep sense of fulfillment. He hadn't just changed a dealership, he'd changed lives. And in doing so, he'd proved a simple truth. It's never about how you're treated, it's about how you choose to respond. Walter Briggs didn't just buy a dealership that day. He built a legacy that would be remembered long after the cars in the showroom had been replaced.